There's a question that quietly haunts almost everyone who has ever loved a self-centered partner, and it usually arrives late at night, long after the relationship has ended, long after the silence has settled in. The question is simple, but it carries the weight of everything you went through. Did they ever feel anything at all after hurting you? Stay with me here, because the real answer is far more disturbing and far more freeing than what most people are told. The truth is, they do feel something. They feel a great deal, actually, but almost none of what they feel looks like what you have been hoping for. Once you understand the gap between what they truly feel and what you have been waiting for them to feel, something inside you finally begins to loosen, something begins to heal. If you are someone trying to spot manipulation, untangle emotional wounds, and rebuild the confidence that was slowly taken from you, hit subscribe right now. This channel exists for exactly that reason, to help you see clearly, heal deeply, and rebuild a version of yourself that no one can ever shrink again. Let us begin where most survivors begin, with the obsession. Because if you have spent hours, weeks, or even years wondering whether the person who hurt you ever felt guilt, shame, regret, sadness, fear, or even a flicker of remorse, you are not strange and you are not weak. You are someone whose nervous system is still searching for an ending that makes sense. The human mind is wired to look for coherence. When someone hurts us deeply, especially someone we trusted, our brain naturally tries to finish the story. We want to know the pain meant something. We want to know they understood what they did. We want to know that somewhere in some quiet moment, they sat with the weight of it. Because if they did, then our suffering was seen. And if it was seen, maybe it was not pointless. This is not weakness. This is the mind trying to repair a break that another person refused to repair with you. But here is the first uncomfortable truth that begins to set you free. The emotional life of someone with strong narcissistic patterns is not empty. It is just built differently. Where you feel guilt, they often feel exposure. Where you feel regret, they often feel embarrassment. Where you feel sadness over hurting someone, they often feel irritation that the situation is no longer under their control. This is not a moral verdict. This is a psychological pattern that has been observed across decades of clinical work. Their inner world is not empty. It is defended. And the walls are so thick, so automatic, so deeply rooted in early shame that real accountability rarely makes it past the gate. When you imagine them feeling regret, you are really placing your own emotional landscape on top of theirs. You are imagining what you would feel if you had treated someone the way they treated you. And because you are an empathetic person, what you would feel would be unbearable. You would not sleep. You would reach out. You would apologize. You would try to repair. You would carry the weight for years. And so you naturally assume they must be carrying something similar. But they are not carrying your weight. They are carrying their own. And their weight is shaped by something else entirely. It is shaped by the need to protect a self-image that cannot bear being seen as flawed, cruel, or wrong. Watch this part carefully because it changes how you see everything that follows. This is where the difference between real remorse and narcissistic injury becomes essential. Real remorse points outward. It is the painful awareness of having harmed another human being, and it creates a wish to repair, to make amends, to understand the impact of one's actions. Narcissistic injury, on the other hand, points inward. It is the painful awareness of having been exposed, criticized, or seen as less than perfect, and it creates a wish to defend, to deflect, to strike back, or to rewrite the story. From the outside, both can look like emotional reactions to wrongdoing, but inside, they are worlds apart. One leads to growth, the other leads to image management. So when someone like this seems upset after hurting you, pause and ask yourself what the upset is actually about. Are they upset because they understand your pain? Or are they upset because they have lost access to you, lost control of the story, lost their supply of admiration, or lost the version of themselves they were performing in front of you? These are not the same thing, and learning to tell them apart is one of the most valuable skills you will ever build, not just for this relationship, but for every future one you enter. There is also the experience of self-pity, which many survivors mistake for remorse. Self-pity sounds like regret on the surface. It uses similar words. It can even produce tears. But self-pity is not about you. It is about them. It is the grief of someone who feels attacked by the results of their own behavior. They may say they feel terrible, but listen closely, and you will notice that the terrible feeling is about what they have lost, not what you have suffered. It is about how they are seen, not how you were treated. It is about their loneliness, not your wounds. Self-pity is one of the most convincing copies of regret, and it is one of the main tools that pulls survivors back into cycles they swore they had escaped. Then there is wounded pride, which is perhaps the most shared emotional reaction in people like this after a conflict or rupture. Wounded pride feels to them like an injury you inflicted in their inner world. They are not the one who caused harm. They are the one who was misunderstood, mistreated, abandoned, or unfairly judged. This is not always conscious manipulation. For many, it is a deeply automatic reshaping of reality, designed to protect a fragile core. The pride is wounded because the image they worked so hard to maintain has cracked, and someone, namely you, has seen behind it. The reaction that follows is rarely apology. It is more often anger, contempt, withdrawal, or a smear campaign that rewrites the story so that they remain the main character and you become the villain. And then there is the fear. Yes, they do feel fear, and it is one of the most important emotions to understand if you want to truly grasp what is happening inside them. They fear being exposed. They fear being seen as ordinary. They fear losing control of how others perceive them. They fear the loss of supply, which means the loss of attention, admiration, validation, or emotional reactivity from the people around them. They fear, in some deep and rarely spoken place, that if the mask ever fully fell, there might be nothing underneath. This fear is not the same as caring about you, but it can look like caring, especially when it pushes them to return, to apologize in vague terms, to love bomb you, to promise change. What you are watching in those moments is often not the return of love. It is the return of fear, the fear of losing the mirror in which they preferred to see themselves. This is why the apologies, when they come, so often feel hollow. You may have noticed that even in their most apparently remorseful moments, something was missing. There was no real acknowledgement of what they did. There was no curiosity about how you felt. There was no question about what you needed in order to heal. Instead, there were sweeping statements, vague regrets, quick pivots back to their own pain, or quiet suggestions that you had your part in it too. This is not because you were too demanding. This is because true accountability requires a level of self-confrontation that their psychological structure is built to avoid. To truly apologize, they would have to see themselves clearly. And seeing themselves clearly is the very thing their defenses exist to prevent. It is also important to understand that not every person with these traits feels the same emotions in the same way or to the same degree. Narcissism lives on a spectrum, and human beings are complicated. Some individuals have flashes of genuine insight, especially under the right therapeutic conditions, though those flashes are rarer and more fragile than survivors often hope. Others stay locked in patterns of denial and projection for their entire lives. The point is not to diagnose the person who hurt you or to predict their future. The point is to free yourself from the exhausting task of waiting for an inner change that you cannot cause and cannot control. And this is where the focus must begin to shift. Because if you spend the rest of your life trying to decode their inner world, you will lose your own. The more energy you pour into understanding them, the less you have left to understand yourself. And the truth that survivors eventually arrive at, often after years of searching, is that the most important person to understand in this story is not the one who hurt you. It is you. Now let us go deeper, because there is a layer beneath all of this that almost no one talks about. The reason you obsess over whether they feel anything is not really about them. It is about you. It is about a younger part of you that learned somewhere along the way that your pain only mattered if someone else acknowledged it. Maybe it was a parent who dismissed your tears. Maybe it was a family system that valued image over honesty. Maybe it was a culture that taught you to be quiet, accommodating, and forgiving even when you were being harmed. Somewhere along the way, you learned that your suffering needed outside validation to be real. And so, when someone hurts you and refuses to acknowledge it, an old wound reopens and the longing for their recognition becomes tangled with much older longings for recognition that you never received. This is why the obsession feels so consuming. It is not just about this relationship. It is about every moment in your life when your pain was minimized, ignored, or rewritten by someone who could not or would not see you. And the most radical, most healing act you can perform is this. You can begin to validate your own pain without needing them to validate it for you. You can become the witness you were always waiting for. You can sit with the younger version of yourself and say, what happened to you was real, what you felt was real, and you do not need their confession to make it true. Don't scroll away yet, because this next part is where everything starts to come together. When you begin doing this, something clear and powerful happens. The trauma bond begins to loosen. Trauma bonds are not maintained by love. They are maintained by unfinished emotional cycles, by unpredictable reward, by the nervous system's attempt to predict and control an unpredictable person. The bond lasts because some part of you is still waiting for the moment when they will finally understand, finally apologize, finally become the person they pretended to be. And as long as you are waiting, you are still tethered. The bond does not break when they change. The bond breaks when you stop waiting. This is also when real boundaries become possible in a quiet way, not as walls built out of anger, but as calm acts of self-respect built out of clarity. A boundary is not a punishment. A boundary is a recognition of reality. When you set a boundary with someone who has repeatedly shown you who they are, you are not being cruel. You are simply no longer pretending. You are no longer organizing your life around the hope that they will become someone they have not chosen to become. You are accepting what is, and from that acceptance, you are choosing what you will allow into your life going forward. And in this acceptance, you begin to reclaim something you may not have realized you lost. You reclaim your perception. One of the most damaging effects of being in a relationship with someone like this is the slow loss of trust in your own reality. You were told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much, too little, too suspicious, too forgetful. Over time, you began to question what you saw, what you felt, what you knew. Healing involves slowly, patiently rebuilding the bridge between you and your own perception. It involves trusting that what you felt was accurate. It involves believing yourself again. This is one of the quietest and most powerful parts of recovery, and it cannot happen as long as you are still measuring your reality against theirs. You also begin to release the fantasy of closure. Closure, in the way most people imagine it, is a conversation in which the other person finally understands, finally apologizes, finally hands you the missing piece that allows you to move on. But closure of that kind almost never comes from someone with deeply rooted patterns like this. And the longer you wait for it, the longer you stay emotionally suspended in a relationship that has already ended. Real closure is not something they give to you. Real closure is something you build inside yourself slowly, through understanding, through grief, through reclaiming your time, your attention, and your energy. Real closure is the moment you realize you no longer need the conversation you once thought you could not live without. There will be moments, of course, when you slip backward. Moments when an old memory rises up and you find yourself wondering again whether they ever think about you, whether they ever feel any of what they put you through. These moments are not failures. They are simply the nervous system processing what happened in waves, the way the body processes any big loss. Be gentle with yourself in these moments. Remind yourself that wondering is not the same as going back. Remind yourself that you can hold the question without letting it pull you into the orbit of someone who could not love you the way you deserve to be loved. And as the months pass, you will notice something subtle but deep. You will notice that you think about them less. You will notice that your sense of self begins to fill the space they used to occupy. You will notice that your laughter returns, that your interests return, that your curiosity about your own life returns. You will notice that your nervous system begins to settle, that you are no longer scanning for danger in every conversation, that you are no longer bracing for the next emotional twist. This is what healing looks like. Not one big dramatic moment, but a slow, steady return to yourself. If this message is reaching you at the right moment, hit subscribe, tap like on this video, and share it with someone who may be quietly carrying this same weight today. Because the people who need this message often do not know how to ask for it, and your small act of sharing may be the first sign of clarity that finds its way into their lives. So here's what you can carry with you from this moment forward. The person who hurt you may feel many things, but most of what they feel will never be what you were waiting for. Their silence is not a verdict on your worth. Their refusal to acknowledge what they did is not proof that it did not happen. Their inability to see you is not a measure of how visible you actually are. You are not invisible. You are not too much. You are not the problem they tried to convince you that you were. You are a person who loved deeply, who tried sincerely, who endured patiently, and who is now finally choosing yourself. And the moment you stop waiting for an admission that may never come is the moment your healing truly begins. Because freedom was never theirs to give you. Freedom was always quietly and powerfully yours to claim. So let us talk about what happens inside that silence, because that is where most survivors get stuck. You imagine them sitting alone at night, thinking about you, replaying the moments, feeling the weight of how they treated you. That image feels comforting because it suggests your pain had an impact, that it left a mark, that it mattered to them the way it mattered to you. But the truth is, what fills their silence is rarely a memory of your pain. What fills their silence is a memory of what they lost. They are not replaying the harm they caused you. They are replaying the moment you stopped providing what they needed. They remember your attention, your admiration, your forgiveness, your steady presence. They remember how easy it was to feel powerful around you. They do not remember the wound they left on your heart, because your wound was never the center of their story. Their narrative was always about them, and your pain only enters their awareness as a side effect, an inconvenience, something they must explain away or redirect. And beneath that, there is something even quieter and far more revealing. There is shame, but it is not the shame you are imagining. It is not the shame of a person who thought, I hurt someone I love and I need to make it right. It is a much smaller, much more uncomfortable feeling. It is the shame of a person who was seen, of a person whose mask slipped, of a person who briefly looked ordinary. That kind of shame does not open the door to change. It locks the door tighter. It makes them more guarded the next time, more careful about who they let in, more skilled at hiding, which is why so many survivors notice a strange pattern after the relationship ends. The person who hurt them does not seem to grow. They seem to harden. They find a new mirror. They find a new audience. They rewrite the story faster than you can even process what happened. And they move through the world as if nothing cracked at all, while you sit with the fracture for months, sometimes years. This is one of the most painful parts of healing, and it deserves to be spoken out loud. Their healing is not your healing. Their timeline is not your timeline. Their conscience, if it stirs at all, works at a completely different speed and in a completely different language. Holding yourself to their pace will only exhaust you. Comparing your growth to their numbness will only make you feel behind. You are not behind. You are simply doing the harder work. You are doing the work of feeling what happened. You are doing the work of staying with the pain long enough to understand it. You are doing the work of rebuilding trust in your own perception, one quiet day at a time. And that work, even when no one sees it, even when there is no applause, even when no one is coming back to acknowledge what they missed, is the work that quietly changes the entire shape of your life. So the next time that old question rises up, the one that keeps you awake at 2 a.m, the one that sounds like, did any of this matter to them at all? Try answering it differently. Not with what you wish were true, not with what your heart still hopes for, but with what you can now clearly see. They felt something, yes, they just felt it about themselves. And your peace does not depend on their conscience catching up. Your peace depends on you, finally, in your own time, setting yourself free.